Honorable Matusi and others to consult on low tones, and I was in that team, and we respected your instructions and guidance. And then this immature boy, Mr. Speaker, comes to say that you are protecting him from the corrupt. Who is corrupt? Is he referring that we are more corrupt than him who goes to Ruto to pick money?
Now let's leave this.
Every day.
You know,
and he's picking money from the face of corruption, and then he calls others corrupt. That is something we cannot accept, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Mbandi, you know.
He has to withdraw that. Otherwise, we are not.
You are a very seasoned Honorable Mbandi.
Should stop being stupid.
Order. Honorable Mbandi, you see, you are a very serious and seasoned politician serving your third term. You see, we cannot, we cannot right a wrong with another wrong. I agree with you to the extent that actually what he said initially was completely unnecessary, and I want him to withdraw. But again, on the other hand, you have also put me in another situation whereby I'm very uncomfortable with me imagining that I'm presiding over a house of boys and girls. These are mature members of parliament in their own rights, elected by their own people. So, Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, surely you will have to withdraw that particular one. It was unnecessary because the members whom I had asked to consult in lower tones actually accepted to do that. So please, just withdraw that before we go to the next point. Yeah, that you must withdraw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, even for ordering Honorable Mbandi to withdraw.
No, you must withdraw that one, and this is on a serious, very
Mr.
serious
Speaker,
note.
I withdraw.
Yes, and apologize, because it is not necessary.
And apologize, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. We will stop it there.
Yeah.
So the issue of Honorable Mbandi, that I do not even want to revisit again, but it was also out of order. So proceed.
But Mr. Speaker, for the record, he also ought to withdraw because boys in this country are known.
Well,
and there are no boys in this house, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, for the record, I urge and plead that he also ought to withdraw.
Well, Honorable Mbandi, really, so that we balance the whole thing, that the issue of, boys is really not right.
No, Mr. Speaker.
Just withdraw that one. And I know you, Mbandi, you really don't have to.
Mr. Speaker, now that Honorable Ndindi Nyoro has accepted to behave well, I will withdraw. But you should know there are also big boys and small boys in every organization. And certainly it's a small boy, and I'm a big boy when we are in this parliament. Mr. Speaker, that he must take into consideration. But I withdraw if he felt I scandalized. What you are saying now is
a bit more realistic. If you are making it an issue of big and smaller boys, and then you are a boy yourself and he's also a boy, then that makes me a little more comfortable. So we can now proceed with business, please. Now let's avoid any sidetracks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I hope I will not get more distractions from the small and big boys like Honorable Mbandi. Mr. Speaker, corruption is a huge cost in this country, and you have seen it when it comes to the growth in our infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to delivering service to the Kenyan people, the biggest obstacle that we have, Mr. Speaker, is corruption. And Mr. Speaker, I was in a process of just giving a few countries that have been able to institute and have stiffer penalties against corruption and economic crimes, Mr. Speaker, and most of them have succeeded. A country like China, Mr. Speaker, is doing very well in combating corruption. Mr. Speaker, a country like South Korea is doing very well in combating corruption. Mr. Speaker, a country like Singapore, and I want to cite something that happened in Singapore in 1984, Mr. Speaker, when the then Minister for Housing, Mr. Speaker, was seen to have been corrupted by the contractors who were doing the housing project in Singapore. And Mr. Speaker, when this gentleman learned that the equivalent of EACC of Singapore, we are looking for him, he started looking for help from the then Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. And Mr. Speaker, Lee Kuan Yew advised the gentleman, who was actually his friend, to first of all finish up with the equivalent of EACC, and then he can look for him. Mr. Speaker, in a matter of 2 weeks, the then minister in Singapore for housing committed suicide, and he left a suicide note, Mr. Speaker, that he could not face the shame of putting the government in such kind of a circumstance. Mr. Speaker, in our country, we need to have that kind of spirit, Mr. Speaker, where public officers, where even contractors are at stage one ashamed of even engaging in corruption. But Mr. Speaker, penalties are also good, Mr. Speaker, so that we have deterrent for people who might think of profiting from public resources. And Mr. Speaker, corruption is just not about bribes. Corruption comes in many ways, Mr. Speaker. One form of the modern era corruption is clientelism, Mr. Speaker, and patronage, where people use the positions that they have, Mr. Speaker, to advance their personal agenda. And Mr. Speaker, maybe the reason why, if you look at Africa, there are so many talented and brilliant young people engaging in politics, Mr. Speaker, across board in Africa. But if you go to the houses in the US and the houses in the UK and other mature democracies, Mr. Speaker, what you find there is a very old people, Mr. Speaker, because there are alternatives for young people. Number one, for example, in the US, instead of joining politics, and especially singularly looking at self-interest, they find that they can advance their personal lives better, either in Wall Street or Silicon Valley, where they do not need any patronage, but they only need to ride on their intelligence, Mr. Speaker, and innovation and ingenuity. But Mr. Speaker, the reason why we see brilliant people, especially in Africa, engaging in politics